The recipe block is starting to come along really great. The next step is to save the values. Every block comes with something called attributes. Attributes are the custom values associated with your block. A few lectures ago, I showed you the isSelected property. This property will be set to true or false depending on if the user is editing our block. This is a property that was provided and handled by WordPress. We didn't have to worry about updating it or managing it. Values provided by WordPress are automatically handled. However, any values we create ourselves have to be managed by us. These custom values are what WordPress calls attributes. Right now, I'm looking at the handbook page for attributes. When defining an attribute, you need to specify the source. If you look through the examples, you'll see there are sources for HTML, text, Boolean, etc. Each of these have a purpose, but the one we'll be using is text. Here's what WordPress says about text. Use text to extract the inner text from markup. That's some strange wording. What does WordPress mean by extract? Well, it's a bit difficult to explain right now without a proper example. I promise I'll break down what this means soon enough, but for now, just know that when creating an attribute, you need to set what kind of value it'll store. You need to define the source property. If you want to store HTML, then you'll need to pass in HTML. For our example, text will work just fine. Before we move ahead with this, I want you to take note of one thing. If you scroll down long enough, you'll see that WordPress provides examples in ES5 and ESNext. It's completely possible to write this stuff without Webpack and Babel. We will take a look at how to do these kinds of things without Webpack, but that will be in a future lecture. Let's go back to our script. I'm going to minimize the edit function so that it doesn't get in our way. Right above it, I'm going to create a new property called attributes. This will be set to an object. Within this object, you need to create your custom data. I'm going to create 5 properties called ingredients, cooking time, utensils, cooking experience, and meal type. Each property must be set to an object. The object will contain the settings for your data. We'll start with the ingredients. We're going to keep it simple and just define the source. Set this to text. Now do the same for the rest of the properties. We're not doing anything that would warrant any other types of data, so text will work for all of our data. Now that WordPress is aware of our data, the next step is to display them. The data will be exposed in both the edit and save functions, but we'll only concern ourselves with the edit function for now. Open the edit function and minimize the inspector controls component. Each list item in the block component should have a placeholder for our data. I'm going to format this a bit so that we can see it better. We'll start with the ingredients. I'm going to replace the placeholder with a pair of curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, input props.attributes.ingredients. All your attributes are stored inside the props.attributes object. The data you want to access can be accessed by its name. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to now do the same for the rest. I want you to do the same. Be sure to format the HTML for readability. Let's give things a test. cd into the blocks directory and run the commands npm run dev. Next, view your recipe post on the admin dashboard. You may end up seeing a message saying that the block has been modified externally. This is to be expected since we've made changes to the way the block works. You may end up having to re-add the block to see the changes. Pause the video and do so now if you have to. The block should be appearing without any errors. The placeholders have been replaced with the data. However, you won't really see anything since the data is empty. We also can't update it since the form fields are not connected to our attributes. First, let's verify that the data is being displayed on the block itself. Back inside the editor, add a property to the ingredients attribute called default. The default property is used to assign a default value to an attribute. I'm going to set this to test. Go ahead and refresh the page. If you refresh, you may see the message "Hello" appear. I'll explain why this is happening in a future lecture, but you will need to delete this block and add the recipe block again. Every list item should be empty except for the ingredients items. It should be displaying the text test. This confirms the edit function is displaying the data dynamically. Alright, let's keep moving forward. The next step is to tie the input fields to our block. Back inside the script, I'm going to remove the default value as we won't be needing it. Then let's scroll down to the Inspector Controls component. Just by looking at this, what do you think we'll have to change to tie the data to these fields? If you guessed the onChange event and value attribute, then you'd be correct. Right now, we're logging the new value. However, we want to update the attribute. This isn't handled for us. Inside this function, I'm going to use the props.setAttribute function. The setAttributes function will update any data in our attributes. Whenever the attributes are updated, then any components that use the attributes will be updated as well. This includes our block. This function will accept an object. The object must contain the properties you want to change and their new values. I'm going to pass in one property called ingredients and set it to new value. We're not finished yet. We'll also want to update the value attribute. Instead of a string, we're going to replace this with the props.attributes.ingredients property. The text control component will now display the value of ingredients and update it whenever a change has occurred. I'm now going to do the same for the rest of the text components. Be sure to set each one to their respect value. The process is pretty straightforward. You should have also updated the select components as the attributes behave the same way. There are two more things we'll need to do before we declare this complete. First, the select components kind of need a default value. WordPress won't give you much heat if you don't set a default value, but I recommend it as a good practice. I'm going to give the cooking experience attribute a default value of beginner and the meal type attribute a default value of breakfast. The second thing we'll need to do is actually optional. Right now, we're hard coding the functions into the attributes. However, you can define the functions outside of the component to make things cleaner. Right above the return statement, I'm going to create a constant named update ingredients. Then I'm going to copy the function and set it as the value for the constant. The last step is to replace the onChange event with the function itself. Something I want to note is that you should not add the parentheses after the name. If you were to add the parentheses, then you would be calling the function. We only want to trigger this function when the event is triggered. Just passing in the name is fine. I'm only going to do this for the ingredients input. I prefer to define the function inside the attribute unless I'm doing filtering. Feel free to do the same if it makes things readable for you. Alright, save your changes and let's test this out. Refresh the page. You may have to remove and add the block again. Once you have that settled, you should see both meal type and cooking experience set to their default values. If you were to update any of the input fields, then everything should follow suit. This is fantastic. I'm going to fill in all the fields and save my changes. I want you to do the same. Refresh the editor. You will see that the values didn't get saved properly. Instead, they all have hello as the value. This is happening because we need to update the save function and render the block. It's been a while since we've taken a look at this chart. So far, we've covered the first 4 steps. We've prepared the environment, enqueued the files, registered the block, and created the settings. The last step is to render the block. We'll cover that in the next lecture.